Hello ladies and gentlemen, MarauderEX here, back with more gaming nostalgia. And this game, probably one of my most watched projects. It definitely ranks up there. It is Nights into Dreams. This game... Alright, so... early fall. I was trying to decide what console to get, and I had heard that the Sega Saturn had been out, and it had a sequel to the Shining series. It had Shining Wisdom out, and I was like, I'm curious. I went to Toys R Us of all places. This is one of those times that, like, I'm going to talk very positively about Toys R Us. At least the old school Toys R Us. New school, not at all. Old school, awesome. But I went and I looked around, and they had the games on these little flaps. The front had the front cover, the back had the back cover, and that was it. That's how you determine how you looked at games, and they had the little tags with them with the price on it. You'd take that up to the front register where it had a little barcode on it, and you'd scan it, and then a nice person in a locked room would come up, verify your ticket and your receipt, and then go into the back and get you the game from their locked case. And yeah, that was back then. And so when I was trying to figure out if this would be the console for me, because at the time there were also other contenders. The N64 was getting ready to come out, the PlayStation was out. It was one of those times that it was really exciting to be a gamer, because, you know, the next gen was coming out, and I had not been involved in a generation change at that point yet. I didn't have a Master System before Genesis. I did have older consoles, but the concept of a generational change was new. And as such, everyone was marketing the hell out of it. You know, what could be done. You saw the tech demos of Mario 64, and, you know, what the gaming world was going to be like in the coming years. 3D was taking over. And so that fall, I'm like, I need to figure out what I want. Well, a friend of mine was like, hey, I've got a ton of disposable money. You want to hang out? I'm like, what do you want to do? It's like, well, I know you're trying to figure out what game to get. I'm trying to do the same. And so he's like, I'm going to use my ridiculous amounts of disposable money to rent game systems from Blockbuster. This is the same friend that introduced me to Chrono Trigger, and the same friend that I introduced to Shining Force 2. And that was what we did. I hung out with him at his mom's house for a weekend, and we played the Sega Saturn. He rented a Sega Saturn specifically for this, for us to figure out what we wanted to be as gamers for the next generation. And that weekend we rented Nights into Dreams, and we rented Shining Wisdom. And we did not know about how the Saturn memory worked, so we actually didn't have a Saturn memory card. And we didn't know that the internal battery could be changed out, so we just figured we couldn't save without a memory card. So we just, throughout the entire weekend, every time we turned off the console, we would have to start over at everything we did. So we played the first couple of stages of Nights into Dreams like this probably about 80 times, and when we started playing Shining Wisdom, and we realized that we couldn't save it, we just didn't turn it off. And we beat the first 2 dungeons by just not turning off the Sega Saturn. But this opened my eyes to that there is a difference between generations now, and there's a reason why marketing is now a thing. I never really bought into marketing before that. Like, I looked at advertisements, but the whole Genesis does what Nintendo don't and stuff like that never really did anything to convince me one way or another that one console was better, just different. But this is when I started realizing, well, maybe things are different. Maybe things are better for particular tastes. And it kind of shook my worldview. I'm not gonna lie. It changed me a little bit, because I didn't know what to expect, what to do, how to handle, new gaming. And I was confused. And as a gamer, I started, looking at what my options were. What did the other consoles have to offer? What types of games were going to be coming out? I had to start paying even more attention, because I knew if I got this console, that I was going to have this console forever. Because, I just can't afford to be buying a console every time one comes out. I would have to kind of live with this purchase for a while, because I didn't have the type of disposable income that my friend did, and I definitely, aren't going to be able to convince my parents every Christmas to get me a new console. Like, up until that point, the Genesis and the Game Gear, serve specific purposes. Like, one was for better graphics, one was for travel and, while on the road. But, like, I definitely wouldn't be able to convince my parents that, I just got a Saturn. I wouldn't, like, how would I convince them to get me an N64 or PlayStation right after that? Especially with games being as expensive as they were, which they're about as expensive as they are now. Anyone who says otherwise really needs to go back and look at a circular. Now, that's not counting for inflation or anything. They just have the same basic dollar price tag that they have these days. So, take that, with a grain of salt, I guess. But, so I rented this game, and I was blown away by the fact that the colors, the graphics, it wasn't full 3D, and I knew it wasn't full 3D, but it was still gorgeous, and it was different, it was new. It provided a gaming experience that the Genesis and SNES couldn't. They tried, but early 3D on those systems it was laughable at best. And I remember it's like, I'm now realizing that there's loyalty to things. Like, I realize at this point, it's like, I'm kind of a Sega fanboy, because they have not just the games, but the franchises that I want. They have the Shining series, and I realized I want this kind of bright, colorful experience more than, I wanted, like, Crash Bandicoot or Mario 64 at the time. So that's what hit me, and it kind of undid all of the positive that I had as a kid. Like, gaming is for different experiences to share amongst people. Now it's like, well, I have a problem I can only afford, because I was getting old enough to where it's like I had more of an understanding of finances, and I realized that, I wasn't going to be able to talk my parents into the same thing, and I'm sucking at going against Jackal, because I'm trying to talk. Anyway. I realized that I had to, much like when I was younger and having to base my purchase off of a Sega Genesis or an SNES based off the dollar value, I realized I have to do the same thing now, but it's going to be even more long-term, because it's the beginning of a generation, and I I had no idea how long generation was going to last. Like, is it going to be, you know, a couple of years, or... I really had no frame of reference of how long the last generation lasted. But I noticed that, you know, with these changes, it's going to be different. So I did what I could. I played what games I could that were available. I was not, you know, a big fan of what was out on the PlayStation at the time. And the N64 wasn't out yet. I just remember seeing various gaming articles about it. And that Christmas, I was getting a Saturn. And I got the Saturn with the 3 free games promotion. It came with Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop, and Daytona USA. And for a while, those were the only games I had, because, again, I had a budget. And the Saturn itself kind of capped out that budget. So I was kind of at an impasse. But again, I had a console that came with games, and it was something that I was, you know, thinking about and focusing on to make the best out of what I could. But I will never forget that I at this point forgot that being a fanboy was kind of a bad thing, and, you know, I had to focus on one or the other, and that was not, you know, that was not good. That was the antithesis of what I had been expecting as a gamer up until that point. It's like, I wanted to share these experiences with friends, but now I have to pick a side. Because, you know, I can't afford not to. If I picked the wrong side, or picked something that I wasn't going to enjoy, then it was a ton of money out the window that I wasn't going to get to see again. And that I wasn't going to convince, you know, my parents to be able to put me on the right side, so to speak. So I had a choice to make, and that's what I had to do. So I chose the Saturn, but it wasn't until years later that I remembered that. Actually, not quite years later. It was about 1.5 to 2 years later, because that Christmas, my local friends, the new ones that I made when I moved into a new neighborhood, kind of shared the same sentiment with me. It was, we have an ability to kind of spread the gambit around. And what we did is, one of us had a PlayStation, one of us had an N64, and I had a Saturn. And we would just take the consoles over to each other's house, and we'd, you know, stay the night and just play games that we normally wouldn't have access to. But at the very beginning, I will never forget that feeling of, I have to pick a side. And it bothered me. It made me unhappy that this is, you know, what I have to do. Because I didn't have the ability to do everything. But now I see the same tokens. Like, people who are picking, you know, the Xbox One or the PS4, and how they get kind of, you know, upset over, you know, specific choices. And it kills me, because I sit here and I talk quite often about wanting to have console exclusives. Give me a reason to buy one console over the other. Which, you know, really goes against that mentality if you think about it. But I've always felt the console exclusives are, you know, a positive to the industry, because it makes people think like I had to, even though it's, you know, not a thought that I enjoyed at the time of I have to pick a side. But it's one of those, I picked a side and I had other friends pick other sides. It wasn't because one was better, but it's because this way we get to experience every different facet that gaming could offer at the time, which was something we didn't think could happen. And it did. And that's what this game did for me, is it brought that type of new experience that even though I had to pick this side, and I felt terrible for having to pick a side, it was something that I didn't regret. Especially since, you know, all of my friends are like, oh, this game's great, but, you know, I kind of want to try this game. So, well, try that game. Tell us if it's any good, or bring it over and we'll give it a shot ourselves. And it allowed us to be something, I guess a little more consumer savvy, because it gave us the option to pick what we wanted to do with our money when we were getting to a time where we were starting to get money of our own. Like, we were all just starting to get, you know, summer jobs and that sort of thing. So that's really it. That's what I came to experience with this game. Is I picked a side, but it's a side that I'm glad I picked, because my friends picked other sides, and it gave us the opportunity to try new things and explore genres and titles that we otherwise wouldn't have got to. And I actually even convinced a friend of mine who hadn't got a console at that point to get a Saturn because of this. And, you know, that's an interesting feeling, because that was the first time that I'd convinced someone to get a console that hadn't already had one, and to get a console that I recommended. So, yeah. Alright, so that's been this episode of Gaming Nostalgia. Again, let me know what you think the next episode is going to be about. I've got a couple more. So, let me know what you think the next title's going to be. And let me know, I really want to hear your gaming nostalgia stories. I haven't talked much about that, but I would really love to see video responses to this of games that really gave you these similar feelings. I want to see that. So let me know. Send a video response giving me your stories. I'd love to hear them. So I'll see you in the next installment. Till then, later everyone.